The Crusades were significant military campaigns in the Middle Ages, organized and funded by the Latin Catholic Church in collaboration with secular European monarchs. These expeditions were aimed at waging what the Church deemed as holy wars, seen as the fulfillment of God's will. While the term crusade or crusader was not initially used, they were referred to as Knights of the Cross or Knights of Christ. The Crusaders primarily regarded themselves as pilgrims. The Crusades emerged as an early instance of the European military expansion movement that followed the cessation of invasions in Europe by Viking, Moorish, and Asiatic steppe peoples, such as the Huns, in the 10th century. European monarchs and warlords, who had previously been in conflict with one another and their own people, now united under the belief that the holy sites in the Holy Land, Palestine, considered rightful Christian property, should be liberated from Muslim rulers who had controlled it since 638 due to their religious beliefs. Crusades were also carried out in the Iberian Peninsula as part of the Reconquista. Additionally, lesser-known crusades, such as the Northern Crusades, were conducted, with the Teutonic Knights being the most prominent participants. Their main operations took place around the Baltic Sea, but they suffered a significant loss of secular power in the Battle of Tannenberg in 1410. The Catholic Church employed the concept of crusade in other religiously motivated conflicts during the late Middle Ages. For instance, they targeted individuals labeled as heretics or pagans by the Church, as well as groups who practiced their own interpretations of religion, like the Cathars in France. Further military actions on land and at sea against Muslims, such as the Battle of Lepanto in 1571, can be viewed as a continuation of the Crusades. However, the Fourth Crusade witnessed a departure from the initial sacred purpose, as the initiators and leaders of the expedition turned against fellow Christians in the cities of Zadar and Constantinople. The Crusades originated as an endeavor by Christians, under the authority of the Pope, to conquer Jerusalem, the holiest site in Christianity, from Muslims and Jews, who also consider it sacred. These campaigns were a delayed response to the Islamic conquests of previous centuries. The Crusades possessed distinctive characteristics, such as typically commencing with a papal summons. The appeal was then propagated through papal bulls and sermons by clergy. Initially, only Crusader knights were permitted to participate until 1213, when thousands of civilians also joined. The Crusades were financed through various means, including specific taxes like the Crusader or the Saladin tithe, and knights often received land in feudal usufruct as compensation. Another defining aspect was that Crusaders obtained indulgences from the Church. The Crusade was depicted as a just war known as bellum justum. This concept originated in ancient Rome and was later adopted into the Christian tradition by Augustine. Thomas Aquinas and Gratian further developed these ideas. Three key elements were crucial: the war had to be declared by a legitimate authority, fought for a just cause, and pursued with righteous intent. The crusade fulfilled all these criteria. The Pope served as the legitimate authority, the noble objective was to liberate Jerusalem, and the fighters were motivated by religious devotion. Throughout history, various concepts have been employed to justify warfare, along with communication techniques that involve negative portrayals of opponents. Initially, the Islamic conquest of Palestine did not significantly disrupt Christian pilgrimages to holy sites like Jerusalem, Bethlehem, and Nazareth. However, in 1009, al-Hakim, the Fatimid Caliph of Cairo, ordered the destruction of the Church of the Holy Sepulchre. His successor, al-Zahir, permitted the Byzantine Empire to rebuild the church, thus reinstating pilgrimage rites. In 1056, under al-Mustansi, 300 Christians were expelled from Jerusalem, and European Christians were thereafter forbidden from entering the Church of the Holy Sepulchre. The Byzantine army's significant defeat against the Seljuk Turks in the Battle of Manzikert in 1071 led to pleas for assistance and troops from the Western powers. The goal was not solely the reconquest of Jerusalem but also aiding the Byzantine army against the Turks, preventing Muslim territorial expansion, and increasing Western influence in the East. Emperor Alexius I of Byzantium sent a plea for help to Pope Urban II and Count Robrecht I de Fries of Flanders in 1091, primarily seeking additional mercenaries rather than the intentions that the Pope and many land-hungry nobles had in mind. Consequently, the emperor was deeply disappointed with the Crusaders. Historical accounts have often been influenced by the narrative promoted by the Catholic Church. According to this perspective, the main reason behind the Crusades was the Seljuks' interference with Christian pilgrimages to Jerusalem and other cities after their conquest of Palestine. However, previous Islamic rule allowed for such pilgrimages, despite the Western powers disregarding the conquests of Jerusalem in 614 and 637, as well as the Church of the Holy Sepulchre's destruction by the Fatimid Caliph al-Hakim. Therefore, factors beyond the confines of Palestine contributed to the movement that led to the Crusades. By the 10th century, Europe had experienced the cessation of invasions by Vikings, Moors, and Asian steppe peoples. Subsequent stability prompted an expansion movement from the 11th century onward. Wetlands and forests were reclaimed, and land was cultivated due to population growth. The military conquest of southern Italy by the Normans from 1029 marked the beginning of centuries of colonization, initially around the Mediterranean Sea, including through the Republic Marinar, and later in other parts of the world. With the eradication of external threats, the warriors who had initially battled the Vikings and other invading factions turned their hostility towards each other, the church, and the local populace. In response, the God's Peace movement emerged from within the church. Initially, it implored local lords to cease violence, but it eventually expanded its call to Christian states. Pope Urban II utilized this argument to quell internal conflicts and redirect focus towards a common enemy of faith. During the early Middle Ages, the content of Christian teachings was subject to open discussions, allowing for diverse interpretations. However, this diversity hindered the unity of the Church. Augustine, the 5th century bishop of Hippo, regarded heresy, a deviation from the true faith, as a renunciation of Christian beliefs. Dogmas were subsequently established to define this authentic faith. The development of dogmatics not only clarified the content of true faith, but also identified beliefs that deviated from it. Such deviations became intolerable, leading to the persecution of adherents, akin to the persecution society described by British historian Robert Ian Moore. By the 11th century, both the Church and major European kingdoms were able to refine their ideologies and objectives. Consequently, corruption and secularism within the Church were condemned, and groups deviating from these ideologies were rejected. This included not only Islam but also movements like the Bogomils, the Waldenses, and the Cathars. The acceptance or rejection of certain groups, such as the Franciscans and the Humiliati, remains ambiguous and lacks clear reasons for inclusion or exclusion. In 1063, Pope Alexander II sanctioned the Crusades of the Reconquista. The Spanish captured the Taifar of Toledo in 1085, and by 1092, Muslims were expelled from Sicily. Undoubtedly, these victories over centuries-long Islamic occupation bolstered the confidence of the Crusaders. Pope Innocent III determined that more forceful measures were necessary against the Cathars, leading to the organization of a crusade to Occitania in 1209. The Fourth Lateran Council condemned various religious groups while recognizing others. Decrees were issued against the Cathars and the Waldensians. Jews were mandated to wear a yellow badge, and Muslims had to bear distinctive symbols. In 1232, Pope Gregory IX assigned the newly established Dominican order with the task of the Inquisition. The Cathars were the initial victims of this Inquisition, but soon after, Jews, who previously enjoyed protection and held a special status with Augustine, along with lepers and homosexuals, were targeted. This dark side of economic expansion and emerging spiritual beliefs became evident. Revised motives to go on a crusade, safeguarding the Church against dissenters. Liberating Jerusalem. Reversing the Islamic conquests. Reuniting the Eastern Church with the Church of Rome. Expanding secular influence in the East. The Crusades provided participants with a general indulgence. After Pope Gregory VII, 1073 to 1085, there was a noticeable increase in piety, which laid the foundation for the Crusades. The call for crusades also granted the Pope a certain authority over the German emperor, as it was unconventional for a spiritual leader to advocate for armed conflict, which was typically the role of secular leaders. In this context, the rivalry between the Pope and the Emperor can also be seen as a precursor to the investiture controversy. The Crusades also served as an outlet for internal issues within Western Europe. For the Catholic Church, they presented an excellent opportunity to export potential conflicts with secular authorities and transform them into a just cause for Christianity. Many nobles and knights joined the Crusades out of self-interest, seeking to acquire land or wealth. These adventurers often sold all their possessions to finance their conquest of the Holy Land. Traders followed in their wake, aiming to develop trade relations with the Middle East. However, it is important to note that economic gain was not the primary motivation for participation in these expeditions. The Church offered participants a plenary indulgence, remitting fines imposed during confession. This was often misconstrued as forgiveness for all sins in the eyes of God, even those that were unconfessed. However, it should be acknowledged that the spiritual aspect was likely the most significant motivation. Furthermore, it is essential to consider that securing plunder during the Crusades was far from certain, and the costs associated with such endeavors were exceedingly high. Participants often incurred substantial debts, and many returned without any wealth. Thus, while economic factors played a role, the spiritual dimension remained the primary driving force behind participation in the Crusades. Thanks for watching this video. If you like the video, please subscribe to our channel.